Hey, it's great to be together again this morning, church. I trust that you're having a good start to the day, and let's just jump into our Bible reading here. Numbers chapter 20, 21, and 22. Some awesome things in the Bible again for us today. If we look at chapter 20, we see water from the rock. And here's a great example of something that has happened already in Scripture with a slight twist. And I love this because this is going to show us a principle that we can apply very clearly to our lives. We remember in the first situation where Moses was to strike the rock and water came out. That was in Exodus. We remember that it happened exactly like God said. This time God is telling Moses, you got to speak to the rock, and he doesn't obey. And the miracle still happens, but there's a consequence for Moses and Aaron's disobedience. And this, friends, is an example, I think, of what Jesus is talking about in Luke chapter 17 to the disciples. They come to him and ask him, Lord, how many times should we forgive people? And his response, essentially, as many times as it takes. And then they say, Lord, increase our faith. And his response to that is, essentially, you've already got enough faith. If you've got faith the size of a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to go from here to there. And the point being, church, that we sometimes need to get to a place, and I want to say this carefully, but I want you to understand what I'm saying. We get to a place where we actually have to move from asking for faith to obedience. God requires and desires us to live life in faith, but it's not meant to just stay there. That needs to translate to obedience. And so we could ask ourselves this question this morning: do I serve the Lord with both faith and obedience? Remember, Moses in this situation and Aaron, they had the faith in God to do the miracle, but they did not follow up with obedience. And that was where God disciplined them. He still gave them the miracle, but they didn't follow in obedience. Good question to ask this morning. Then, if we go to chapter 21, we've got the bronze snake. I just love this example. This creates such a beautiful picture for us for what Jesus describes in John chapter 3. And so we're going to very quickly go through this. The Israelites are grumbling and complaining, and so God sends a plague of snakes. That's the justice of God. Their sin deserved punishment, and he sent it. But then, what does he do? Instead of removing the snakes, he provides a way in his love for them to be rescued from the result of the plague. And that's his love for them. He doesn't just leave him in that place where they're all going to die. He sends Moses a solution. Put that snake on that pole and you can look at it. And what he does is he invites people then to look at the snake on the pole. And he says, anyone who's willing to look at that snake will be forgiven and rescued. And that's his love and his forgiveness for us. Oh, it's the relationship he invites us to. Just like Jesus said to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, he says, just like Moses did that, I am going to be put on a pole, and anyone who looks to me is going to be saved in a relationship with the Father. Oh, it's just so wonderful, church, because it illustrates the same principle. Sin is still going to be here till the end of time when Christ comes back again to rescue us and bring us into heaven for all eternity. But he has sent a solution for that problem, and it's Jesus on the cross. That's God's love, and now we can walk in relationship with him. Beautiful. Then if we look at chapter 22, we are introduced to this very interesting character in Scripture named Balaam. And he is a sorcerer. He is a pagan diviner, if you will. I hope I said that word right. But he is not a very, we'll say, well, he's not a believer in God. He's not someone who we should probably follow all of his examples. But he does some things exceptionally well. And I think it's worth noting that Delanne is going to talk about him more tomorrow. Here's what I want to draw out of chapter 22. You can see throughout this passage that Balaam appears very committed to what God is telling him. And that's actually admirable. First, he goes to the Lord and asks him a question. No, don't go with him. Okay, can't go with you guys. Then they come back and God says, okay, now you can go with him. And then on the way, his donkey appears to have better spiritual sight than he does. And we can be asking ourselves, well, like, what's going on? He's heard from the Lord, and yet now the donkey sees better spiritually than he does. It's a great story, and just enjoy it. But here's I think, what we can learn about Balaam. There's some good things to follow, but there's some red flags that we can see in verse 35. After Balaam's on the way, God rebukes him as being disobedient. And it looks like his actions are obedient. But what does God see in his heart? An unsurrendered heart. We don't know exactly what it would have been, but I think we can say that Balaam was going with a heart unsurrendered to the Lord, even though his actions appeared to be obedient. And I think that's a good question for us, church. We can ask ourselves this question: Lord, do my attitudes in my heart always reflect my outward actions that I live in? It is good, church, for us to be walking in obedience. But if we recognize that sometimes the attitudes in our hearts don't match, it would be good for us to seek the Lord afresh on having our hearts transformed to be more like him. I hope that encourages you. I hope that you have a great day and that you're a blessing for Jesus today.